Okay, the first question we address, why does this class matter? Number one, media is ubiquitous. We touched on this in the orientation syllabus video. Media is ubiquitous, which is a fancy word that means it's all around us all the time. We swim in a sea of mediated messages. We have a mediated landscape that we inhabit. I told you in the intro video, the joke about the two fish swimming and the older fish comes up to them and says, "Hey, how's the water?" And the younger fish turns to his friend and says, "What's water?" Because when it's all you've ever known and it's all around you all the time, it's the environment you live in, it's hard to recognize it. And it's that way for us with media. So we are constantly interfacing with television, radio, advertisements, social media, applications, video games, all kinds of things like that. And so this class is designed for us to take a moment to step out of the water and look at it for what it is and try to determine what kind of impact it has on us individually, on our identity, our culture, our values, our norms, and us collectively, our society and culture and our norms as a people group. We are exposed to about 3,000 advertisements per day, and that number is actually pretty old, so it's probably more than that now. 3,000 ads a day, that seems like a lot, but when you think about it, you wake up in the morning, maybe the TV's on, maybe the radio's on, there are advertisements interspersed into that content. You get in the car, let's say you drive to school or work, you pass by billboards. Let's say you stop and get gas, you see advertisements at the gas station. Let's say you ride the bus to school or work, or you ride MARTA, you see advertisements on the train or the bus. Once you get to school, even walking through the halls of the university, you see advertisements. In your social media feeds, lots of advertisements. You're getting spam in your email. So we are exposed to ads that now just feel like white noise. We hardly even notice them. But what is the point? Why are there so many ads in front of us all the time? We certainly didn't choose them. We didn't want to have all these ads in front of us. They're there to make money. They're there to be profitable. And the way that they become profitable is by changing you as a person, by changing the way you want to spend your money. Changing your brand loyalty, what you feel like buying, how much of it you feel like buying. All of those advertisements were paid for with a motive to influence and impact you. And so then you have to ask yourself, have I been influenced or impacted by all the advertisements I encounter every day? And in what ways have I been? And that's hard to figure out, but we're going to get at that question in this class. 96% of American households have at least one television. So most of all American households have a television. 4 billion of the almost 7.5 billion people on the planet today are connected to the internet. And that number is growing exponentially fast. So lots and lots of people are online. Media is everywhere. Our mediated landscape will probably only increase. The amount of media we're exposed to every day will probably only increase. We study literature, right? We study books. We spend a lot of time. You have probably spent a lot of time in your high school, in your middle school, in your elementary school studying books. What makes a book good? Literature, reading, The Scarlet Letter, or Grapes of Wrath. How to write yourself, how to be a better writer yourself. But how much time did you spend studying the media in the same way? Studying television and movies and radio and social media and video games? But yet you spend much more time interacting with, interfacing with the media than you do with books, if you're like most Americans. And so in your college time, a lot of you are required to take this class because we recognize that it is important to get outside that water and to look at it critically. So the second reason this class matters is that media shape our realities. What does that mean, that media would shape our reality? We like to ask the question, who's been to Australia? And usually in the class, like less than 5% of the students have ever actually been to Australia, but yet we know a lot about Australia. How do we know anything about it? If I asked you to describe Australia, you might say things like kangaroos, the outback, lizards and lots of wild forests, something like that. Where did you get the idea of Australia that you hold? If you feel like you know something about it, how do you know something about it if you haven't been there? Well, the media, probably in large part, has shaped that reality as you know it. What you know about Australia has been largely shaped by the media. All of the various forms of media that you've encountered in your lifetime has painted a sort of picture of what Australia is. And that's how the media shapes our reality. Sorry if you're hearing some rain in the background. It's raining here. So if I were to ask you about Bel Air, what comes to mind? Oh, maybe it's the show The Prince of Bel Air, right? Maybe you watched that growing up. Or what if I asked you, what is a healthy family like? What is a healthy, happy family like? What kind of images come to mind? What kind of stories come to mind? And where did you get that idea? Maybe you grew up in a healthy, happy family. Maybe you didn't. Maybe it's based on like the Cosby Show. Maybe it's based on a bunch of advertisements. Maybe it's some blend of lots of examples you've encountered in the media and in real life. Maybe it's friends' parents or your own family. But it's probably some kind of stew, some kind of soup that has a little bit of a lot of different sources. So at least in part, the media shapes what we think of as good or normal. When I ask you what is love or what is falling in love, and where did that concept come to be in your mind? How did you build that concept or framework? The media was at least in part responsible for your understanding of stories like this, because you see many, many stories in the movies, the television, in the books, in the podcasts about families and love, and it at least in part contributes to our understanding of them and how our stories play out. So I collected some images of Disney characters falling in love. So even like the look of falling in love, what does it call to mind? It might look something like some of these images. The Disney movies, the Disney princess movies, especially the older ones, have been criticized for oversimplifying the story of love, what it means to love and be loved. That's an interesting discussion to have in this class. What does it mean? What is love? And how much of it was shaped by stories that we encountered in the media. So that brings us to an even more basic question. What is communication? Some of you guys are communication majors, mass comm or speech comm majors. Well, communication is a symbolic process whereby reality is produced, maintained, repaired, or transformed. So in a lot of ways, communication contributes to reality as we know it, as does media. So a word is made up of sounds and characters. So think of the word word, W-O-R-D. The word is a symbol that represents a concept. So you have two images here. The image is the image of milk. On the one hand, you have the actual milk itself, but then you have the symbol that represents it. And the symbol that represents actual milk, which actual milk, what is it exactly? It's like something that exists inside of mammals. We tend to drink milk from a cow. Maybe we have it with cereal. There's a lot of things connected to that concept of milk, but then we represent it by this symbol, the word milk. And we just happen to give each sound in that word a letter to represent it. A series of lines to represent that sound. But if you know a second language, or if you've learned another language, then you will realize that the symbols are different for different languages, right? So think about it like that. Is milk actually milk? No, milk is some concept that exists in your mind, and then we reduce it to a symbol in order to think about it and talk about it. And this symbol might be milk, or it might be leche in Spanish. Or what about this engagement ring? When you look at this image and you think about an engagement ring, it's probably got even more concepts and stories attached to it. That whole experience is so much more rich and dynamic than the word, the symbol that represents the actual thing. So the symbol is the word engagement ring. But then the engagement ring itself symbolizes marriage, right? When a woman wears a diamond ring on her left ring finger, it symbolizes marriage, which has so many concepts attached to it and so many stories attached to it. So we simplify into symbols, which are words, which are communication, in order to communicate, in order to get outside of our own brains and connect with other people. So the bridge between my island of experience, the concepts that I have when I see an engagement ring are different from every other person in this class. And you guys are all different from each other. Nobody has the exact same thoughts and feelings and stories around an engagement ring. Because our entire lives we've been constructing meaning, and we are attaching it to things like marriage and engagement and rings and diamond rings. Everybody's experience is a little different. The bridge that can connect us is language, is words, is communication. Communication is the bridge that makes us not islands, but rather networked islands where we are trying to communicate and share experience in some way. And it works really well. Communication is one of the best things that humans have, is our complex language systems. So this is the word legate. The word legate is a symbol that represents an emotion that we don't have a word for in English. And because we don't have a word for this emotion, we may not feel it, or we may not express it as well, because the communication itself affects our reality, the fact that we don't have a word for it, or the fact that Eskimos have lots of different words for snow. They conceptualize snow differently. Or people that may live in very different climates, they may have additional words for colors, and so they have a whole conception in their mind around these additional colors that they have named and study and that are a more common part of their life than we do. So the communication, because there are names for things, shapes our reality. I want to read you an excerpt of a story about these two anthropologists in these pictures, Shelley and Renato. And they were married. They spent time with this tribe in the Philippines, studying them. And this tribe in the Philippines was known for beheading. They had almost a cultural practice of beheading people. And so this couple went and lived with them for a while to study the tribe, and found them to be mostly nice, decent people with this strange habit of beheading people occasionally. So I'm going to read you an excerpt. One evening, members of the tribe asked Renato if they could hear tape recordings of his conversations with the people he studied. The voice of a deeply loved and respected man who had recently died began to play. The room fell silent. The men's eyes narrowed and their lips curled. Their faces turned into masks of rage. They told Renato that hearing the tape made their hearts feel legate. It makes us want to take a head, they told him. Over and over they chanted, it makes us want to take a head, it makes us want to take a head. So they had these really angry expressions, and they were chanting, it makes us want to take a head, so it's probably freaking him out. 14 years later, Renato and Shelley, along with their 2 young sons, went to live with another tribe of the Philippine rainforest. While on a hike to a different village, Shelley fell off of a 65-foot cliff to her death. That day, crouching next to Shelley's body on the riverbank, Renato felt the seed of an alien emotion he had never experienced begin to grow inside of him. Back in America, after the funeral and the resettling into daily life, this feeling continued to grow. But Renato did not know how to express it, how to define it. Then one afternoon, as he was driving down a sunny street in Palo Alto, California, he couldn't bear it any longer. He pulled to the side of the road, and a howl came roaring out of him. And then he knew this was legate. This was this high-voltage, angry grief. Renato didn't understand the world of chaos and violence that the original people connected to this word. Why did it drive men to kill? He tried to gain a deeper understanding, but defining legate was like trying to describe the color blue. without ever seeing it. The English words that best describe Leggett might be high voltage, a powerful energy running through and out of the body. Renato had no control over when his feeling would come or how long it would stay. There was nothing within the American palette of emotions or in mainstream books about death that helped him. He just knew that he had to howl. And because Renato could now grasp the force and the meaning of the word Leggett, he was able to make some sense out of the chaos. He was able to give his emotions form and let them pass through his body in the form of Leggett, a howl, an angry, grieved howl. So even this emotion that we don't have a word for, the fact they have a word for it shaped their reality. And because Renato encountered that word and that reality when he was living with them, it became a part of his reality. And he was able to identify an emotion and help process it out of his body by knowing that word and that concept. So communication is very connected to reality as we know it. So what are mass media? Mass media are the vehicles of communication designed to reach mass audiences, which is as simple as it sounds. It's basically what you already know it to be. Mass media are the songs and television shows and movies and apps that are designed to reach mass audiences. Anything people use to reach large audiences. What is culture? Culture, and this is an overly simplified definition if you are in anthropology or if you study this a lot, but culture in a simplified way is the learned and socially acquired traditions and lifestyles of the members of a society, including their patterned, repetitive ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. It is the symbols of expression that individuals, groups, and societies use to make sense of daily life and to articulate their values. So culture in America, what is American culture? Well, one of the stories or narratives or quotes that you hear a lot is be all you can be, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or rugged individualism. And a lot of our movies and books express those values. Rags to riches. So how did we get to know that ideal? Was it taught to us at some point explicitly, or did it sort of become a part of us because of lots of stories that we encountered in the media? Probably a little bit of both. The food that we like, the ideal of beauty, our customs and traditions. We learn these things through family and friends, yes, but also through the advertisements we see all the time, the movies, the books, and all the media we encounter. And it helps us to identify ourselves and to understand our world. Media creates and it maintains culture. So I've included lots of examples, lots of images, a little mashup of things that exemplify culture. And even the movie Black Panther, right? Their costuming was representative of lots of different countries. In Africa, there was so much culture in that movie. So then you have to ask yourself, what is your culture? Did your family have a culture? Of course. What kind of culture did you inherit from your family? What kind of culture did you inherit from the place where you grew up? What kind of culture have you chosen? Some of us may choose anime or hipster stuff or lots of different subcultures that have a lot of meaning that we may choose to explore and let become a part of us. And then the fourth reason for this class is media literacy. Media literacy is the knowledge and skill necessary to think critically about the content that we consume. So it is a really big concept, but it's pretty much the aim of the class is to increase your media literacy. Just like you studied English classes to increase your literacy, you would study media and media classes like this one to increase your media literacy. We're going to study media literacy a lot more as the semester progresses, but I wanted to share some of the characteristics now. So media literacy includes things like critical thinking skills, enabling audience members to develop independent judgments about the media content they encounter. It includes an understanding of the process of mass communication, an awareness of the impact of media on individuals and society, just like I keep saying, that awareness of the impact, strategies for analyzing and discussing media messages, an understanding of media content as a text that provides insight into our culture and our lives. So seeing media messages almost as little stories that become part of our larger narratives that we live in, the stories we tell ourselves and that we live out. It includes even the ability to enjoy, understand, and appreciate media content, to develop effective and responsible production skills. So if you're going into media production, media literacy skills help you be more informed and responsible in doing that. And lastly, it includes an understanding of the ethical and moral obligations of media practitioners. And I am interested in media literacy because I find it personally empowering. As a college student at Georgia State, I started to learn about these concepts. I took classes like Persuasion, which we still teach. I actually teach that class at Georgia State. And it opened my eyes to how much I had personally been impacted by mediated messages when I was in a passive state. And so it sort of turned my mind on so that I would be more aware. Some people say it like this, like some of us choose to be careful with what we eat, right? What we put into our body, what we eat and we drink, because we realize it becomes us, it feeds our cells. And some of us may even be careful about the products we put on our skin, knowing that in some way it is absorbed by our skin as a large organ and gets into our body and sort of becomes our body in a way. And media is kind of like what you're feeding your mind. And is it becoming you somehow, right? We don't consciously make our food produce energy that then helps us create new cells, and we don't necessarily consciously tell our brains how to produce meaning and understanding and values and norms out of the media we encounter. So media literacy just helps make us more aware. And for me, it was personally empowering because it made me think critically about what I was feeding my mind and how it was impacting me and how I might want to choose more carefully what I was feeding my mind. I should add that media literacy is not being a snob about media and just saying no to it all or something like that, but it's rather taking control over it so that we're not just passive consumers, but we are active critical consumers and also active critical producers so that the whole experience becomes better for us so that we can enjoy media much more. Okay, so now let's talk about media convergence, changing it up a little bit, adding the video to keep it interesting. So media convergence, what is it? It's the way we talk about what's going on today. So think for a second about how you watched television when you were little. Or think for a minute about how you played video games or even computer games when you were little, or how you listened to music when you were little. It might have been on distinct devices. But now you can do all of those things on your one smartphone, right? And so the idea of media convergence, it's talked about in a lot of different ways, but one of the important ways is you take these previously distinct technologies like television, a camera, GPS, that used to be in different individual devices, and now they are converged onto one device, like a smartphone, for example. So it is a way to describe the trend of having our previously distinct technologies merged into one device so that now we don't need the TomTom in our car, right? We can use the GPS app or Google Maps on our phones. So we can pull out our phones and watch our shows, and we can also access our GPS. And we can also play music and play games, right? Which would have required separate devices if you go back enough years. Okay, so now let's talk about concentration of media ownership. So we're going to talk about two terms that are really similar in meaning with a subtle difference. One is the concentration of media ownership, which happens more within media companies. right? Different large media companies buying up smaller media companies. And then we're going to talk about conglomeration, which is larger non-media companies like Amazon buying up newspapers, buying up media companies. And those two issues affect the economy of media. So the concentration of media ownership. Ownership of different media companies concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. So if you looked at this within textbooks, right, you guys just maybe bought a textbook, so then you would see it because the publisher of our textbook has bought up lots of smaller publishers, and now there are more options for publishers for textbooks. Or with the music industry, right, large record labels buying out smaller independent record labels. And so why would this happen? Why would the bigger media companies continue to buy more and more smaller companies? Well, for one thing, there are advantages. There's less competition. If you're buying out all of your smaller competitors, you are taking out a threat of that small record label growing big and competing with you. And you're also making your process more cost effective because of economy of scale. So with economy of scale, the unit price of an item goes down as the mass production of that item goes up. So let's take the example of making t-shirts. So if you wanted to start making t-shirts, it might cost you $15 a shirt to have a shirt, screen printed and then to have it sold. But if you're Walmart and you're making 1 million of that t-shirt, it might cost you $3 or $5 a shirt to make it. So if it's just me as an individual making a t-shirt shop, which my husband and I has played with this, because now with Amazon you can make your own t-shirt shop pretty easily and they'll print it for you, which really helps with economy of scale, but still the unit price is like 15 bucks. So if I were to make 30 t-shirts, it might cost me $15 a t-shirt, so I would have to charge $30 or more in order to make a profit on that t-shirt. But Walmart, because they buy in bulk, maybe they buy 5,000, or 1 million t-shirts, and they have a relationship with the printer and they have a relationship with the factory to where it drives their cost down, right? So when their cost of production goes down, their potential to make a profit goes up. So that profit margin, the ability to make money, make a profit off that t-shirt goes up. So if Walmart makes 1 million t-shirts for $3 a t-shirt and then they charge 20 bucks a t-shirt, they're making as much profit as me, but they're only charging $20. So economy of scale, and they could charge $30 for that t-shirt or $50 like me, and they're making much more profit because it costs them a lot less to make it because they're so big. So as companies, large media companies, get bigger and bigger by buying smaller companies, their unit price is going down. So the amount that it costs them to make a song, for example, if they own a lot of media companies, they're going to have more contracts and relationships that enables them to produce those albums more cheaply than an independent label would. It's going to cost an independent label more, so then their profit margin is going to go down as their production cost goes up. So the bigger companies get, the more potential for profit and the higher their profit margin. So that's the idea of economy of scale, which really drives the concentration of media ownership and even conglomeration, we're going to talk about in a minute, where non-media companies buy up media companies. So with concentration of media ownership, we're talking more about media companies buying up smaller media companies so that there's fewer and fewer media companies producing the media. And then with the next slide, we have non-media companies buying up those media companies. And so we just have fewer companies in general that are running things, that are running even the US economy. So what are the disadvantages of this concentration of media ownership? Well, you have less diversity in media voices. So when this big record label buys the small record label, right? Then the big record label might try to have a subset that addresses that genre that independent record label really specialized in, but it's not as interesting anymore, right? There's fewer people running the show. And with fewer people running the show, you may lose that diversity of voice. And also a possible silencing of minority or non-mainstream views. As these smaller companies get eaten up, the big company has a formula for how to make a pop song, and so they're going to stick to their formula. because ultimately, the bigger companies are focused on profits, right? So they're going to do what benefits their profits instead of the small media company that may be more interested in putting out cool art or a message or supporting, unique artists or whatever it might be. And then there's an increased possibility for corruption, right? When you have more power in fewer hands, then that person can potentially, that large company can potentially become more corrupt because there's less competition, right? They are the one source, and so they may be able to drive up prices if no one is competing with them and take advantage of the consumer. So you have that potential. So there are certainly disadvantages for the regular consumer like you or I. Okay, now let's talk about conglomeration, which is a really closely tied idea. And in conglomeration, you see the increase in the ownership of media outlets, right? So media companies owned by larger non-media companies. So a great example of this is Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, right? Amazon, mostly a retailer, started as a book retailer, now sells all kinds of things. Who knows what you guys are buying on Amazon? And now Jeff Bezos also owns the Washington Post. So it's kind of like he probably had more of an idea of profit, or maybe he's good at retail, but now he owns the Washington Post. So journalism was probably not his original focus. It's probably not his specialty, but because he has lots and lots of money, he's able to buy the Washington Post and look at how he can make it the most profitable. So maybe somebody who is more motivated by journalism, and ethics in journalism and the truth of journalism and the nature of journalism, the importance of journalism, may be motivated to make high quality journalism that shows diversity of perspectives, that tries to be non-biased, that tries to run stories that are truly important for the voter to consider, versus somebody that's more interested in profit, who may see news journalism as a formula, in which case they may run more sensational or dramatic stories or news stories about the Real Housewives and the Kardashians, because those stories are cheap to produce and will get a lot of interest. So you've got conglomeration, so the ownership of media companies by non-media companies. And so you just have a concentration of the amount of companies. There are fewer and fewer big companies that are buying up the small companies. You see this even when you go to the gas station. We walk to the gas station and we see all these freezers full of drinks, right? We have maybe 50 choices of a drink we could choose, but in reality, they are mostly all owned and produced by either Coke or Pepsi, those big companies. So the diversity in the ingredients, for example, is not very large. So we may want a drink that's really good for us, that's actually tea that's sweetened not with high fructose corn syrup, but sweetened by actual, sugar, or maybe even something like stevia, and Coke and Pepsi may be less likely to use those kind of ingredients. Whereas a smaller manufacturer that has a very different goal, not just profit, might have more honest ingredients, for example. So you see various drinks produced by Coke and Pepsi that have really similar ingredients across the board. They might taste a little different with different flavoring and whatnot. So what does this lead to? It leads to a fun word called oligopoly. And really the U.S. economy is driven by oligopoly. And this is where a market is dominated by very few large companies. So in oligopoly, in terms, if you're talking about the government, is ruled by a few very powerful rich people or rich companies. An oligopoly in the marketplace is a market, like the media market, that's run by a few very large operators, and that is the case. In the United States, the media in general is made by 6 giant companies, so that's an oligopoly. 90% of the media content that Americans consume is produced by 6 big companies. So there's not a lot of diversity in content. Now Netflix, as of today, which maybe by the time you see this lecture video, it's been bought up, but as of today, Netflix is not predominantly owned by any one of these 6 conglomerates. And if I were to ask you about really original content and where you can find it, you guys would probably say Netflix, because they're making a lot of their own shows, and we're seeing some really different kind of shows, really different kind of themes, a lot of different perspectives. And that may be because they're unique in that they're not owned by one of those 6 conglomerates yet. Well, fingers crossed, we'll see. Through mergers and acquisitions, we see in buyouts a small number of large media companies, a small number of large companies coming in to own most of the world's media outlets. Okay, so the US media oligopoly. Let's take a look at what's going on today with the 6 big media companies. Here they are: Comcast, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, CBS. Probably the biggest one is Comcast, if not Disney. And you can see listed under them some of the big things that they own. So, Time Warner, for example, owns CNN, HBO, Warner Brothers, no surprise there, right? And then you might be surprised to see Viacom here, that Viacom owns MTV. They also own BET and CMT. So there again, we've got different subgenres, different tastes, different styles of music with BET and CMT and MTV, but they're owned by the same big company. Right? So these are the 6 big ones, and that's all we're going to talk about today, guys. So have a great one. Until next time.